There are a few variations on the previous example I want to go through before we move on. So one of them has to do with what exactly it means to initialize things. We've reached a part in the course where the exact meaning of initialization is suddenly really important because we now care about the rectangle object getting to decide how it gets initialized, how it gets constructed. But the question I want to ask isn't about the rectangle itself, it's about its members. So I've seen down here, I've given the members a default value, but that default value is going to be superseded because the constructors for the rectangle will set width and height. The question basically is this, and I'm fully aware that the answer is sort of, irrelevant for ints because we can set ints as much as we want. But we know that there are types, rectangle itself is one of them, where construction and reassignment are two separate things. For example, I can make a rectangle with the width and height, but I can never modify the width and height afterwards. So now initialization versus modifying it later is a big distinction. So the question is this, on line 17, am I initializing the member width? And I mean that in the very formal sense, not am I giving it a value, but am I giving it the very first value it's ever had? And you should be able to look at this and maybe deduce that the answer has to be no, because we know by now that this is a regular assignment statement. You can only do assignment statements on variables that already exist. And in fact, consider the fact that the rectangle constructor is a regular member function. I can do anything inside that constructor that I can do in a member function, including using the member's width and height. I'm doing that on line 17, but I could just as easily, if I wanted to, print out the value of the member width. So I could say, width is, and then I could try printing out the value of the member width before I've made any conscious attempt to initialize it. And I'm going to use that to prove a point. So I print that out, and when it calls a default constructor, it says width is 0. Okay, who knows what that means? Maybe that's a fluke. Let's go down here and set this to 999. So this is the default value provided in the definition of the member. And we've been using this so far in this course a few times to give some sensible default value to things. And what it prints is width is 999, which I think allows us to conclude that as of line number 15, the member width has already been constructed. It's already been created for us. We're just setting it to a new value on line 17. And because of how important it's been this whole course that we distinguish initialization from modification, I think we should try and worry about that distinction now as well. It's going to be a lot more important later when our members are more complicated than just ints, but I want to introduce some extra notation for that now. Actually, I'm going to go back down and I'm going to set width and height to 999 initially. I want to demonstrate that the constructor really should take over this initialization. These values should never be initialized to 999 because the constructor should specify its own initial values that supersede those. And I know that if I do it this way now, so if I try and print out width when the default constructor runs, of course I get 999 because as of line 15, the variable width has to already exist because when the constructor begins, you can do anything you can do inside a member function. And that includes using the members, which means the members always have to exist by that point. What I want to do is initialize my member width and my member height. And to do that, I can use this notation. If in my constructor, I want to specify my own initial values for the members, when the members are first created, then I can use this. I can write a colon after the closing bracket, and then a comma-separated list of initializers. The same way that I would do if I was initializing a new int in main or something, I'd write the name and then the initial value. And I can do that here. When I do that in the constructor, that is used as the only initializer for the member. So the one down below that says 999 would not be used. As a result, this notation is sort of frowned upon now. If you want to initialize your members in a constructor, you should do it with this initializer list syntax. So I'll try that out. And then I'm going to remove that extra print statement. So we can see here when I call the default constructor, the width is not 999 because before the constructor begins executing, the members have already been initialized. And because I can initialize it this way, there is no need for the equal signs. There's no harm in using lines 16 and 17 instead of this, but we have to get used to using this notation because there are times for particular types where the equal sign won't work. And we're going to see those next week. Okay, so if I want to initialize my members in this constructor, I want to initialize the member width to be equal to this width that was provided from outside. So I can do that. In my list of initializers, I can use my parameters if I want to. And I initialize height to the height. and then I can get rid of these two assignments. Now don't worry, I am still checking that the width and height are valid. So I'm doing that here. If either of these is less than 0, I throw an exception. If the exception gets thrown, it makes no difference what's already happened in the constructor. The object will not be constructed. So this is still safe. I'm initializing my members directly in the signature, sort of before the constructor begins running, sort of in the signature of the constructor. Because once the constructor begins running, all the members have to already have been initialized and constructed. I can modify them, but if I want to specify their initial values, I have to do that with this special notation here. And we'll just verify that that worked. There we go. And so it's still R2, which calls the parameterized constructor. There it is. R2 still has width 6 and height 10. So these initializers are working. So for now, for int members especially, it's up to you whether to use the equal sign or to use this notation. But in the next few videos, you're going to notice I like to default to this notation because it's a good habit to build, and I think it is a best practice these days.